What could make a cowboy return to the same station bench every Friday for 3 years? Even though the person he was waiting for could never step off that train again? The whistle split the cold afternoon as steam rolled across the platform. A nickel slid beneath the ticket window. The cowboy took his usual place on the second bench, eyes fixed on every passenger. Then the new station clerk stepped out into the rain, sat beside him, and asked the one question no one else ever dared to ask. "Before we begin, tell me where you're watching from." A nickel clicked against the brass ledge beneath the ticket window. Mara Ellison looked down at it, then at the hand that had placed it there. The fingers were broad and weathered, with a pale scar crossing one knuckle. Before she could raise her eyes, the hand withdrew. "One platform ticket," the man said. Mara slid the small paper square beneath the opening. 5 cents. He gave a quiet nod. "Thank you, ma'am." Then he walked outside. It was Friday, 3:52 in the afternoon. Mara had worked at Larkspur Junction Station for 6 weeks, long enough to know the rhythms of the place. Freight wagons arrived before noon. Cattle buyers argued over car space after lunch. The telegraph key began tapping whenever someone was already busy with something else. She had also learned the rhythm of Wilson Kincaid. Every Friday, he tied his bay horse to the same post beside the station. He wore a clean white shirt, carefully mended at the left cuff, dark trousers, and boots that carried the red-brown dust of the road from his ranch 12 miles south. When flowers grew along the prairie fences, he brought a few. He always sat on the second bench from the east end of the platform. At 4:12, the eastbound train came around the low hill, its whistle cutting across the Kansas grasslands. Coal smoke rolled over the station roof. Steam hissed beneath the cars. Passengers stepped down with trunks, carpetbags, children, parcels, and tired faces. Wilson watched every one of them. He never approached the conductor, never asked to see the passenger list, never showed surprise when the last traveler walked away. The train would pull out, wheels striking the rails in a slow, iron rhythm. Wilson stayed. Only after the final car disappeared beyond the eastern curve and the rails stopped trembling did he put on his hat, return to his horse, and ride south. Everyone in town had noticed. No one asked. Larkspur Junction was changing. Barbed wire cut across land that had once been open range. Wheat fields spread where cattle trails had faded. Yet the station still gathered every kind of frontier life under one gray cedar roof. Mara watched it all from behind glass. She had come from Wichita after burying her father in January and her mother in March. She spoke of neither. She kept the schedule board correct, balanced her drawer twice, and remembered which trains connected through Newton and Salina. One afternoon, a rancher looked past her and asked when the real clerk would return. Mara issued his ticket, counted his change, and told him his train left at 6:14. Her voice never shifted. Later, Station Master Ezra Bell said, "Best way to last in railway work is to give people no reason to remember you." Mara looked through the window at Wilson on his bench. She had already begun remembering him. Samuel Reed, the 16-year-old porter, told her Wilson owned 300 head of cattle and had lived in the county 15 years. "Why does he come every Friday?" Mara asked. Samuel glanced toward Ezra's office. "They know enough not to ask." One warm Friday, a gust lifted a purple flower from Wilson's hand. It rolled beneath Mara's window. After he rode away, she picked it up and placed it in an empty ink bottle. Before Ezra returned, she hid it in her coat pocket. The rain came 2 weeks later. By noon, water ran from the station roof in silver ropes. Passengers crowded beneath the awning. The platform boards darkened almost black. At 3:52, Wilson arrived. His coat was soaked. Water dripped from his hat brim as he placed the nickel beneath the window. Mara nearly told him the railway could survive without his 5 cents that day. Instead, she gave him the ticket. He sat on the uncovered bench. The eastbound arrived behind smoke and rain. A soldier stepped down with a canvas bag. A mother carried a sleeping child. Two cattle buyers hurried toward the hotel. An elderly couple was met by a daughter holding an umbrella. Wilson watched them all. No one came to him. The train pulled away. Still, he sat in the rain. Mara closed the ticket window. "You have 20 minutes left," Ezra said. "No passengers are waiting." Railway clerks don't abandon their post to sit with idlers. Mara took her coat from the hook. Wilson did not look up when she sat at the far end of the bench. Rain struck the roof. Water ran along the edge of the platform and gathered beneath their boots. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then Mara asked, "Who are you waiting for?" Wilson's fingers tightened around his hat. He reached inside his coat and removed an old platform ticket. The paper was soft at the folds, worn thin from years of handling. "My wife," he said. Mara waited. Her name was Evelyn. First year we were married. She went to Salina to care for her mother. Every Friday, she took the eastbound home for the weekend. I met her here. He looked toward the second bench. She said she could see me before the train stopped because I never changed places. When her mother died, she came home. But we kept coming Fridays, sat here and watched the trains. She said this was where she first understood somebody would always be waiting. Mara watched rain run along the rails. When did she stop coming? Wilson looked toward the eastern curve. She died 3 years ago. Fever, 12 days. Mara turned toward him. You know she won't be on the train. I know. Then why come? His gaze traveled down the wet platform. Because this is the last place I can remember her running. His voice remained level, but his thumb pressed hard against the old ticket. She always ran the last 20 yards. Said walking was too slow after 3 hours away. At the ranch, he could remember the fever, the basin beside the bed, the covered mirror, the quiet after the burial. Here he remembered Evelyn unalive and running toward him. Mara did not tell him to stop. I'm sorry, she said. Wilson nodded once. They remained until the rain weakened. Then he placed the old ticket back inside his coat, mounted his horse, and rode south through the gray Kansas afternoon. The following Friday, Wilson arrived at 3:52. A tin cup of hot coffee waited on the second bench. He looked toward Mara's window. She lowered her eyes to the ledger. Wilson sat, wrapped both hands around the warmth, and turned toward the eastern tracks. For the first time in 3 years, someone had been waiting before he arrived. When the train had come and gone, he carried the tin cup back to Mara's window. Thank you. It gets cold waiting. He turned the cup once between his palms. How did you know I take it without sugar? Mara kept her eyes on their timetable board. I guessed. You guessed right. The next Friday, she made 2 cups before she realized what she was doing. She drank hers behind the glass and left his on the bench. By the 3rd week, Wilson looked toward the window before he sat down. On the 4th, he returned the empty cup with a red apple resting across its rim. Mara ate it after closing the station. The wind sharpened in November. One Friday, she carried her own coffee outside and stood near the wall, uncertain whether she had crossed too far into something that still belonged to Evelyn. Wilson shifted on the bench. He did not invite her. He simply made room. Mara sat. The eastbound arrived with 3 passengers. Wilson watched them step down, but his gaze did not hold as long as it once had. After the train left, he asked, Did you always work for the railway? I kept books in Wichita. My father taught me schedules and figures. He said no respectable business should sleep with an unbalanced column. Is he still there? No. The word closed the door. Wilson did not try the latch. A week later, he told her how he first met Evelyn. She came off this train carrying more bags than sense. Wouldn't admit she needed help. But you helped her. Before she could stop me. Mara smiled into her cup. And if she hadn't returned the next Friday? Wilson studied the rails. I expect I'd have come back once more. He said Evelyn had later called him frightening because he showed up without any guarantee she would be there. She'd never had anyone do that, he said. That evening, Mara walked home through prairie wind that rattled signs above the darkened shops. The blacksmith banked his forge. Lamps glowed behind family windows. At Mrs. Patterson's boarding house, Mara ate alone after the other lodgers had finished. Mrs. Patterson noticed the railway cup beside Mara's plate. She said nothing. Mara thought about people who showed up without guarantees. Her life had never worked that way. Her parents had needed medicine, meals, clean sheets, balanced accounts. Their need had been certain. Wanting something for herself was not. One Tuesday, a delayed freight car kept Mara at the station after dark. When she locked the side door, Wilson was waiting beside his wagon. The boarding house road is iced over, he said. How did you know I was still here? Samuel brought a telegraph notice past the ranch. He had ridden 12 miles to take her 6 blocks. Under the wagon blanket, Mara told him about her parents, her father's long illness, her mother following him 2 months later, the empty Wichita house. Wilson did not say he understood. He asked, "What made your mother laugh?" Mara turned toward him. She laughed when father lost his spectacles while wearing them. Wilson remembered. The following Friday, he brought a ranch ledger filled with slanted figures and ink blots. He placed it beside her coffee. Your father would object to this. A laugh escaped Mara before she could stop it. Wilson's guarded face softened. The train entered the station while the ledger lay open between them. For several seconds, neither looked at the passengers. Abigail Pike came 2 days later under the pretense of buying a ticket for a cousin. She spoke gently about Wilson's grief, the town's respect for Evelyn, and the danger of people misunderstanding a woman's kindness. Then she mentioned Mara's railway position. Some reputations, Abigail said, are easier to damage than repair. Mara counted her change onto the brass ledge. Your train leaves at 9:06. After Abigail departed, Ezra Bell warned Mara there had been no complaint. Not yet. Mara asked whether drinking coffee during her break violated company rules. No. Then what is the problem? Ezra looked away. Policy isn't always what costs a person her position. The next Friday, Abigail and 2 churchwomen stood near the far end of the platform. Mara remained behind the glass. Wilson waited until the train left. Then he carried his untouched coffee to her window and stood there drinking it while asking about spring livestock cars. He never looked toward Abigail. He simply refused to act as though Mara were invisible. 3 mornings later, Caleb Dorsey found a cow alone at the edge of the south pasture, breathing hard. By noon, 6 animals showed the same sickness. By sundown, the count had reached 40. Caleb entered the ranch house while Wilson was laying out his best shirt for Friday. If it's the lung sickness, Caleb said, we don't have days. Wilson looked at the clean shirt. Then he looked through the window toward the southern pasture. That Friday, 3:52 came and passed. The second bench remained empty. Mara watched the station entrance until the eastbound arrived. Wilson did not come. The coffee cooled untouched while black smoke rolled across the platform. Mara waited until the eastbound disappeared beyond the hill before carrying the cup inside. Samuel Reed came from the telegraph room with a yellow slip folded in his hand. Message from Caleb Dorsey, he said. They need lime, disinfectant, and veterinary supplies. How many cattle? It doesn't say. That night, wind pressed against the boarding house windows. Mara lay awake listening to the glass tremble in its frame. Before dawn, she was back at the station checking freight manifests by lamplight. The veterinary shipment had reached Newton but had been marked under the wrong classification. It would sit there until someone corrected the routing. Ezra Bell told her the Kincaid Ranch was not railway business. Mara laid the shipping receipt before him. The freight was paid for. The railroad misplaced it. That makes it railway business. Ezra studied her, then signed the authorization. Samuel sent the correction over the telegraph. The supplies reached Larkspur Junction a day early. At the ranch, Wilson and Caleb had separated the sick cattle from the main herd. Frozen ropes burned through gloves. Bedding was dragged into the yard and set alight. Men emptied troughs, scrubbed them with lye, and worked with cloth tied over their mouths. At night, the barn was filled with coughing and the low scrape of hooves against wood. Wilson slept in a chair for less than an hour at a time. Caleb found him near dawn, carrying another bucket toward the stalls. "One man can't save a whole herd," Caleb said. Wilson did not stop walking. "No, but one man can decide not to abandon it." By Friday, 11 stalls stood empty. Wilson washed the smoke and mud from his hands, saddled his horse, and rode toward town. He reached the station just before the eastbound pulled away. Mara stood beside the bench with the coffee in her hand. "You're late." "I know." His coat smelled of cold smoke and disinfectant. One boot was caked with dried mud. 40 took sick, he said. 11 died. Mara did not tell him it could have been worse. "Will the ranch make it through winter?" "Yes." He looked down at the cup. "It may cost some men their jobs by spring." He drank the coffee cold. The next week, Wilson brought a freight invoice and an old ranch ledger. Mara spread them beneath the ticket window lamp after closing time. She checked car numbers, loading dates, storage fees, and weights. 2 livestock cars had been charged to Wilson, though neither had reached Larkspur Junction. Another fee had been entered twice after a delayed shipment. The refund would cover winter wages for 2 ranch hands and purchase feed. Wilson placed folded bills beside the ledger. Mara pushed them back. "I corrected a railway mistake." "You saved 2 men's jobs." "I corrected a column." He held her gaze. "Both can be true." Later, Wilson asked whether she would look through the ranch accounts when the sickness passed. Mara closed the ledger. "I won't become an unpaid replacement for the woman who used to sit beside you." Wilson understood. "I didn't ask Evelyn because she was my wife. I asked because she was better at figures than I was." He placed the payment back on the table. "You're better at railway charges. I'm asking for your work." This time Mara accepted. Mrs. Patterson accompanied her to the ranch the following Sunday. Wind drove dust beneath the porch. Burned patches marked the edge of the south pasture. Inside the barn, 11 clean stalls stood open and unused. The ranch house was orderly, but too quiet. In the office, a second chair had been moved beside Wilson's desk. "Evelyn sat there," he said. Mara stopped with one hand on the chair back. Wilson opened the ledger. "It's a chair, Mara. Memory doesn't break because someone else sits down." She sat. They worked until afternoon light turned pale across the floorboards. Caleb entered with a question about a spring shipment and addressed Wilson. Wilson nodded toward Mara. "Ask Miss Ellison. She found the error." Caleb repeated the question to her. Mara's answer saved them from ordering a livestock car on the wrong date. After that, Caleb looked at her differently. News of the visit reached town before the next Sunday. Abigail Pike approached Mrs. Patterson outside the church and spoke about Mara placing herself in a dangerous position. Mrs. Patterson fastened her glove. "A woman balancing freight accounts in daylight is less dangerous than a town inventing sins after dark." Ezra warned Mara that the railway superintendent had heard about her private work. She showed him the hours recorded in her ledger. He found no rule broken. Then he placed a letter on the counter. "Salina Junction needs a permanent clerk. Better pay. Larger staff. Housing nearby." "You sent my name?" "You're qualified." The pause after his answer said the rest. One night, a delayed passenger train kept Mara at the station past dark. When she stepped outside, Wilson waited beside his wagon with a wool blanket, a covered bowl of stew, and a lantern. "You stayed late last Tuesday, too," he said. He had begun watching her hours as carefully as she once watched his Fridays. On the ride to Mrs. Patterson's, Mara told him more about her mother. Wilson told her Evelyn disliked roses because they demanded too much tending for too little return. Mara laughed. This time, Wilson smiled fully. At the gate, neither moved at once. He almost spoke. Then he said goodnight. The formal offer from Selina arrived in February. 30% more pay, permanent status, a staffed office, a future earned by her own ability. Mara read the letter 3 times. That Friday, Wilson brought the first small flowers surviving near the south fence. He placed them beside her cup. Mara nearly told him. Then he opened the ranch ledger and said, "With your help, I expect we can manage spring shipping." The words settled between them. With your help, not with you. That evening, Mara signed the acceptance letter. Samuel tied it inside the outgoing mail pouch and carried it toward the eastbound. Through the station window, Mara watched Wilson ride across the frozen prairie, unaware that only 3 Fridays remained. On the first of them, she made the coffee as she always did. She measured the grounds, heated the water on the backroom stove, and set 2 cups on the second bench. At 3:52, Wilson's horse appeared beyond the freight yard. He spoke about spring calving and the south pasture beginning to recover. Mara listened, while memorizing things she had never meant to learn so closely. The scar across his thumb, the bend in his hat brim, the way he turned his cup before answering. "Something troubling you?" he asked. "I'm tired." Wilson studied her, then nodded. He did not push. The following Friday, he brought wildflowers and placed them beside her cup. Mara looked down at them. "Are those for Evelyn?" They were growing along the south fence. It was not an answer. She left them untouched until the train had gone. Then she gathered them carefully. Wilson saw. Neither said a word. Abigail Pike came to the station 2 days later. She had heard about Selina. "A larger town may suit you better," she said. "Wilson will eventually require a wife comfortable among county families." Mara counted her change onto the brass ledge. "Did Wilson ask you to find one?" Abigail's mouth tightened. Mara handed over the ticket. "Your train leaves at noon." The third Friday was clear and bitterly cold. The eastbound carried only 2 passengers. Wilson barely watched them. Mara sat beside him longer than usual. "Why do you come now?" she asked. "Because it's Friday." She waited. Wilson looked at her. "And because you're here." The words nearly undid everything she had decided. "If I weren't?" He turned toward the tracks. Before he could answer, Ezra called from the office about a disputed freight receipt. The moment closed. Wilson rode home believing another Friday remained. Mara knew it did not. Thursday night, she packed her dresses into a railway case. Mrs. Patterson stood in the doorway and watched. On the bed lay the Selina letter, the tin coffee cup wrapped in cloth, and Wilson's flowers pressed between the pages of a book. "Does he know?" Mrs. Patterson asked. "No." "Why not?" "He has lost enough. I won't force him to choose because I'm leaving." Mrs. Patterson folded her arms. "That sounds considerate." She waited. "It also sounds like fear wearing good manners. Selina is a real opportunity." "I know." Mara tightened the strap around the case. "Then leave because you want Selina. Don't leave because you've answered for him." Mara did not sleep. On Friday morning, a damaged fence gave way near Wilson's south drainage ditch. 3 calves became trapped between loose wire and the muddy bank. Wilson and Caleb worked to free them. Wilson checked the sun twice. Caleb noticed. "You've spent 3 years reaching that station early for a dead woman," he said. "Don't be late for the living one." Wilson looked at him sharply. Then Samuel rode into the yard with a freight message. Miss Ellison's case is beside the ticket office, the boy said. Looks like she's traveling. Wilson dropped the repaired wire. At 3:52, the second bench was empty. Mara carried one cup outside from habit, then took it back in. The whistle sounded beyond the eastern hill. She balanced the station ledger, handed Ezra the keys, and lifted her case. Selina is fortunate, Ezra said. Mara thanked him. He seemed about to say more. Instead, he straightened the schedule board. The train entered behind steam and black smoke. The conductor stepped down and called the Selina connection. Mara gripped the case handle. Through the carriage windows, she saw every other window she had stood behind. Her father's sick room, her mother's last winter, the empty house in Wichita, the ticket office where she had watched other people leave. Final boarding. Mara lifted her bag. Hooves struck the station entrance. Wilson rode in with mud darkening one trouser leg. He dismounted before the horse had fully stopped. He saw the train. He saw the case. Then he saw Mara. Where are you going? Selina, I accepted a permanent position. When? 3 weeks ago. The answer struck him, but he did not turn it into anger. You should have told me. You never asked what I meant to do. The conductor called again. Wilson looked at the eastbound, the same train he had watched for 3 years. Then he faced her. I spent 3 years waiting for a woman who couldn't come back. Mara did not move. I don't want to spend the rest of my life missing one who could have stayed. Her eyes filled, but her voice remained steady. Do you want me, Wilson? Or do you only want someone on the bench after the train is gone? The platform quieted. Wilson said Evelyn's name without hesitation. I loved her. I always will. He stepped closer, but did not touch Mara. Evelyn is why I learned to show up. You're who I'm showing up for now. Then why didn't you say so? Because wanting you felt like leaving her. The locomotive vented steam between them. Then you sat beside me, Hal continued, and I began to understand that leaving grief isn't the same as leaving her. The conductor raised his watch. Wilson stepped away from Mara's path. If Selina is the life you want, take it. I'll carry your bag onto the train. His voice lowered. But don't leave because you think there's no place for you with me. Mara looked through the carriage window. She remembered Evelyn running the last 20 yards because walking was too slow. Mara had spent years watching life through glass. She lowered the case to the platform. The conductor looked at her, then signaled the engineer. The train began to move. Neither Mara nor Wilson embraced. Wind from the passing cars lifted her coat and sent coal smoke across the bench. They watched the final carriage disappear beyond the hill. Only after the rails stopped trembling did Mara speak. The Selina position is gone. I know. She turned to him. Then this had better be more than a Friday. Wilson waited before answering. It has to be every day, or it isn't enough. Mara placed the handle of her case into his hand. Together, they walked away from the station. Behind them, Samuel carried the forgotten cup outside and placed it on the second bench. Steam rose from it into the cold after they were gone. The next morning, Mara returned to the station. Selina had already filled the position. Larkspur Junction had not yet hired another clerk. Ezra Bell handed her the ticket office keys without comment. Later, she saw him remove the notice seeking her replacement from the schedule board. At Mrs. Patterson's, Mara unpacked the railway case. The dried wildflowers slipped from between the pages of her book. Mrs. Patterson placed them in a clean jar. Was staying foolish? Mara asked. Most worthwhile things look foolish before they've had time to become a life. Wilson did not rush her. He met her after late shifts. He brought ranch accounts and paid her for the work. He joined the boarding house table for supper, attended church beside her, and spoke her name openly in the general store. When plans touched her life, he asked first. By April, the prairie had begun to soften. New grass showed beneath the winter stalks. Snowmelt filled the shallow cuts beside the road. Wilson drove Mara to the ranch beneath a pale blue sky. He showed her the work before the house, the cattle pens, the south pasture, the repaired fence near the drainage ditch, the barn where 11 stalls had once stood empty. Only then did he lead her inside. Evelyn's kitchen remained as she had arranged it. Flour near the work table, blue bowls stacked by size, herbs hanging beside the south window, a chipped jar full of wooden spoons. Mara found the coffee without asking. She had good judgment, Mara said, about most things. Outside, time had returned along the garden's southern edge. Onion shoots pushed through the dark soil. Purple flowers leaned against the wall. One bed in the center lay empty. Mara knelt and pressed 2 fingers into the ground. I'd need to know what she planted before I tried to tend it. I remember some. Then we learned the rest. That evening, they worked at Wilson's desk. Mara sat in the chair Evelyn had once used. Does it still feel like I'm sitting in another woman's place? She asked. Wilson considered the question. No. He rested one hand on the ledger. Evelyn's place was never a chair. A week later, Abigail Pike stopped Mara at the general store. People say there may be a marriage, she said. Do you truly believe you can replace the woman he mourned for 3 years? Mara folded the cloth she had purchased. No one replaces the dead. Abigail waited. The living decide whether there is still room beside them. Wilson entered in time to hear her. He did not answer for Mara. He picked up her parcel and asked whether she was ready to leave. Outside, he said, You didn't need me in there? No. She rested her hand on his arm. But I'm glad you came. Wilson still went to the station on Fridays. Sometimes Mara sat beside him. Sometimes she remained behind the window. The old ticket stayed inside his coat. One evening in May, Wilson told her he meant to go alone the following Friday. Mara understood. At 3:52, he placed a nickel on the counter. Mara slid him one final platform ticket. Neither pretended it was ordinary. Wilson sat on the second bench with wildflowers gathered along the south fence. The 412 eastbound arrived. A man stepped down with a leather case. 2 sisters followed. A mother carried a baby. Then a young boy jumped from the last step and ran along the platform, laughing as his mother called after him. The running opened something in Wilson. He saw Evelyn as she had been, skirt gathered in one hand, hat nearly falling, laughing as she crossed the last 20 yards because walking was too slow. For 3 years, he had believed the station held that memory. Now he understood Evelyn had traveled with him all along. She was in the way he kept faith with his ranch hands, in the kitchen that still worked by her careful order, in the garden returning each spring, in the courage to come for Mara without knowing whether she would stay. Wilson removed the old ticket. The paper was nearly worn through at the folds. He placed it on the bench and laid the wildflowers across it. He did not tear it or cast it onto the tracks. He left it where it had been safe. The train disappeared beyond the eastern hill. This time Wilson stood before the rails, stopped trembling. He walked to the ticket window. Mara finished her shift and stepped outside. She saw the flowers and the old paper. She asked nothing. Wilson offered his hand. She took it. Through summer, their life grew by ordinary measures. Mara kept her railway position. She handled cattle car schedules and corrected freight receipts. Caleb began bringing questions directly to her. Wilson cleared the empty garden bed and waited for Mara to decide what belonged there. She planted beans from seeds her mother had saved in Wichita. Wilson called the whole place the kitchen garden. They worked by lamplight, shared supper after late trains, and walked the south pasture while cattle moved through the dusk. One evening, Wilson stood with Mara between Evelyn's returning herbs and the new rows of beans. I know how to wait, he said. I'm asking whether you'll let me build something while I do it. Mara looked toward the kitchen window. May I keep working at the station? I'm asking for your life beside mine, not for you to give yours up." She said yes. They married on a Saturday in September. Mrs. Patterson sat in the third row. Caleb stood beside Wilson. Samuel held his best hat awkwardly. Ezra arrived late after the afternoon train. Mara wore a dress the color of the Kansas sky before sunset. Wilson wore the same best shirt he had worn every Friday for 4 years. After the wedding meal, they walked to the station. No train was due. They sat on the second bench from the east end and looked toward the curve in the tracks. "Evelyn knew," Mara said. Wilson turned to her. "That you would show up without a guarantee." He looked east. Yes, she knew. Mara placed her hand over his. Wilson held it. The station bell sounded once in the evening wind. Freight wagons creaked through town. Lamps appeared behind windows. South of Larkspur Junction waited the ranch and the life they would build. Wilson and Mara rose together before darkness settled. For the first Friday in years, the second bench remained empty, and no one was being abandoned. Maybe that is what healing really looks like. Not forgetting, not pretending the past never happened. Just finding the courage to carry love forward instead of letting it keep you standing still. If you had walked through Larkspur Junction that autumn evening, you might have seen nothing more than an empty platform, a quiet stretch of track, and a rancher walking home beside the woman who chose to stay. But sometimes, the most important moments leave no grand celebration behind. They leave a quieter heart. They leave room for tomorrow. Perhaps you've known a place that still holds someone's laughter, a kitchen that reminds you of home, a road you still take because someone you loved once walked beside you there. If so, I hope Wilson and Mara's story reminds you that loving again does not erase the people who shaped us. The heart was never meant to choose between gratitude for yesterday and hope for tomorrow. It can hold both. I'd love to know where this story found you today. Is there a place that still carries a memory you'll always treasure? Share it in the comments. I'd be honored to read it. If these frontier stories of quiet strength, enduring love, and second chances feel like coming home, I hope you'll join me again. There are many more journeys waiting just beyond the next horizon, and I'd be grateful to have you along for every one of them.